Today we have a special guest, Tim Jablonski, the Senior Vice President of Programming and Audience Development at Little Monster Media, is joining us. And Tim is an expert in using data and creative strategies to grow YouTube channels. Today we're going to talk about the future of YouTube and AI, some technical integration and tools, and Tim's advice on that, and then a little bit about ethics because we love to dive on those dark topics. So Tim, I know you were recently at VidCon. For those that are not aware, this is an event where you can find many of the industry's top creators and leaders and decision makers and the people that will pay for things on YouTube. Tim was giving a couple of conversations. I believe it was an understanding different verticals, length, format, and the other one more based around data analytics. Is that correct, Tim?
Yep. Yeah. One on mostly short versus long form. That's still kind of the question on everyone's mind. And then one on how we're using metrics in the creator economy.
Yeah. And we'll go into that because I know you have some thoughts on the matter. But first, like when you were in Bitcoin, was there any conversation about how AI will impact content creation, let's say in 2024 and 2025?
There was, and I think it's interesting. So usually at VidCon, some kind of thing comes up thematically. And actually, AI has been kind of a big theme for 2 years now. It was a pretty big theme in 2023, and it was a pretty big theme in 2024. So it's certainly something that people talked about. I think it's interesting in that you could see that there was a slight change in temperature in the room. Both for better and for worse. I think in 2023, and this was something that caused a lot of eye rolling for me personally, was AI is going to be everything. You're just going to make videos with pure AI. You're going to type in one sentence and a perfect video is going to emerge fully formed. It was all the wild claims and very little to back it up. This feels like a year that was reckoning with that a little bit, and that there was some recognition that we need to actually put forward certain practical things. And I think there's been kind of broadly an understanding that even if generative AI improves, even if it gets to a better position where, you know, the classic are the hands correct, that even if you can make the hands 100% correct, you probably don't want to put generative AI unedited in front of your audience with no insight. So it was certainly still a big talking point. How the industry is approaching it, I think, has changed quite a bit in its you know, from 1 year to the next.
Okay. And what's your take on it, like your personal one?
So my take on it is that AI has been in the space already, and it's kind of an indelible part. When we talk about the recommendation algorithm, we're talking about a machine learning algorithm, which is what, you know, generative AI is. It's ultimately the same kind of machine learning. So it's inseparable from the space. My general thought is and there's kind of three concerns. There's three levels of concern, and obviously we'll talk about ethics, like you said. Ethics is a major concern. There's legality, which I'm not really able to talk about as not a lawyer. And then there is practical concerns. So I, in 2023, was extremely pessimistic just based on how people were talking. You get all sorts of wild claims, and I, you know, am concerned about those claims bearing out. I think some of the stuff that we've done practically is very, very interesting from both like a data analytics perspective and from an accessibility perspective, really, are kind of the two that really interest me. From a creative standpoint, I'm still leery. And the reason being, when we're talking about something like accessibility, we're usually talking about translation. So we're talking about translation or recognition or the ability of like what's on screen for someone who's maybe hard of seeing, something like that. Those are binary outcomes. And a machine is very good when you can tell it that something is definitively correct or incorrect. When we're talking about something creative, most of what we're talking about is its ability to replicate a human's work. And that's kind of what we're setting as the standard of for is this correct and is this not correct? And we have to have a sufficiently large data set to put something like that together. Because of that, you're going to naturally get kind of in terms of creative ability, you're going to get a bell curve because you're going to have a pretty large data set. And I think you're going to find that when you tell a computer, act like this data set, it's going to shoot for the center of the bell curve. It's going to shoot for the most common denominator. We have always lived in the online video space. We have always lived in a space that it's difficult to cut through the noise, and cutting through the noise is kind of the most difficult thing you can do. And 5 out of 10s, 6 out of 10s rarely cut it kind of across any part of what you're doing. So it's one of those things that when we talk about generative AI in terms of like creative output, I'm always leery about that, because if I'm doing something and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to do it at a 5 out of 10 really quick with a prompt, and people talk about like, what if I generate thumbnails that way? And it's sort of like, hey, maybe you're a 2 out of 10 at making thumbnails, and a 5 out of 10 is an improvement, but that's not going to get you over that hump. That's not going to cut you through the noise. Like, you have to find a way to do that. And at that point, then I start to wonder creatively if you just doing your bad thumbnails is more of an affectation that stands out in its own way. So it has a tremendous amount of power. Any kind of AI machine learning has a tremendous amount of power to tell you how your content's performing. I'm very excited by its potential to let us try and find correlations that otherwise would just be too labor intensive to find. I'm eternally leery about its ability to create content in an automated way fully unto itself. So in the background, at the start of the creative process, I'm generally cool with it. When we start to think about it as a finality, that's where I think it's really going to stumble, even with improvements.
Policy will more than likely change and evolve probably faster than we can keep up with, because I keep seeing emails every day with change of terms of service. So how do you feel YouTube is going to be reacting? Because we know they want the viewership, they want people to watch no matter what. Your video might suck for everybody, but if they find this one person in the world that likes it, they're going to show your videos all the time to this person, right? Because they want money. A sustainable way of making money is avoiding controversy and keeping brands happy. We already know that. How do you see YouTube taking a stance with AI, whether it's because of intellectual property, misinformation? Do you think there will be differences among these categories?
YouTube in general tends to play things, I'm trying to find the right words for it, like a weird case of both going very slow and very fast at the same time. So you may or may not be aware already that they've put in policy that if you have any generative content, you're supposed to disclose that already. And just say, with specifically related to like factual things. So if it's obviously generated, you don't have to necessarily disclose that this obviously fictional image is fictional. But in the case of like, real people, you're supposed to disclose that. And I think that that's where the heart of what, ahead of legislation, they'll want policies in place that discuss, the idea of a deep fake, and the idea of copyrighted content. Now, theoretically, all of their policies existing around copyright catch that theoretically. The question there for them, and the one that for YouTube, at least in the near term, probably won't be a huge thing, is the idea of whether or not generative content can be copywritten, which is, you get into the whole, and you may have discussed the Naruto the monkey case. Yeah, there was a monkey at a zoo that was named Naruto after the show Naruto, and it stole someone's phone and managed to take a selfie. And then people published the selfie that was taken by this monkey. Yep. And and then somebody sued for copyright infringement because it's my phone, whatever. And it's like, well, it's the monkeys. And the Supreme Court eventually decided that you needed human authorship in order to enjoy the protections of copyright. So the image that Naruto took cannot be copyrighted. And it's not, I think there's been early cases that said like, hey, fully generative stuff can't be considered human authorship. But you'll get into questions of whether a prompt makes that happen, whether editing it makes that happen, where that threshold exists will be the tricky question. YouTube in general tries to take a step back, and they obviously look at like, hey, if you have the source video, and you can make the claim, and usually it goes to them to hash it out, and it never makes it to court anyway. So they will probably exist within the world of Content ID from that perspective. They'll do what they can vis-a-vis deepfakes and require you to disclose, which won't stop bad actors. But if somebody finds it or reports it, gives you, a clear terms of service violation that you can hit them with. And I suspect that they'll put those things forward. I don't think they're going to make a move on disallowing generative content. And I think they're going to take the, whether right or wrong stance, they're going to let the meritocracy of their own recommendations kind of decide whether or not that stuff has merit and value.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say, right, about how do we measure what's AI or not. For example, something that I realized a couple of months ago was I'm an immigrant, English is my second language. You'll notice I make mistakes sometimes when I speak, So when I write, I use Grammarly. And now what's starting happening to me is that I feel extreme paranoia that what I write sounds like ChatGPT. So I'm rereading every sentence, overthinking it. I'm literally cancel my subscription to Grammarly because I'm like, I don't think this is a benefit for me anymore. I think I already know enough grammar to kind of like hold my own, but I don't want to even risk something like AI because you might lose clients. So that's kind of...
It's an interesting thing, and you can find a lot of negative responses, and I don't blame anyone because it feels a place you'll see it is one. I think it's interesting because you kind of hit on it. You can, even if there's nothing obviously wrong, there's not a misstatement of fact in writing, or there's not messed up fingers. I think at least initial, kind of in our initial song, we severely underestimated a human's ability to detect when something is computer generated, even when there's nothing innately wrong. And so if you see a post on LinkedIn, and you've probably seen the kind, highly saturated, highly colorful, highly detailed, and you think that would be an incredible amount of time to spend on this pretty throwaway post. And then suddenly your head isn't thinking like, oh, neat, cool image. You're thinking it wasn't important to this person to have a bespoke image. This image is throwaway. So it's like there is like this weird, even within like an enthusiast space, there's like a weird crackback that I'm wondering, how far we'll see that go.
So you said this, I had a moment literally visualizing my feed, and I do notice, and again, this is funny coming from someone that has a podcast about creativity and AI, but I'm like, yeah, I kind of, like, I went back to using just Canva designing stuff myself, even though sometimes it can look kind of like basic because I'm not a graphic designer. Because again, I might use, let's say, Firefly, now I don't know as much anymore if I feel comfortable doing that. I'm still thinking, but
Sure.
I'm like going back to doing it on my own, even if it looks shit, because I'm like, it's true. And I hadn't realized until you said it. It kind of like, I don't know, something's off.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, and I don't know how to articulate. And this is where it's weird because, like, I work in numbers. Like, I pull up spreadsheets and I go to people and I say, and I have to be like, I don't have enough to like, reject a null hypothesis, whatever, and that, and I give people a nerdy spiel and show them spreadsheets and bar charts. But I think even at that level, we have to acknowledge there is a certain spirit to creativity. And it's one of those things that we assumed like, hey, we can fix the hands, we can make, that the images look, that there is still something missing, and it's ephemeral and it's hard to pin down. Once you start to see it and people are trained to see it, or like they're not trained to see it, but like they almost don't need training. Like you can just kind of tell it's like, this is too detailed for the words being said. This is too, like it's too many things. It's just generalized enough. That it's one of those things and that's why I get to the thing of like, even if it's great, you don't want generative things to be just front facing straight up, because I think it makes you feel, whether or not like you're an artist and have like a bleeding heart passion thing, it feels a little off. It hits that uncanny valley again. It's just not quite.
I think it builds back, also on what you said before, right? Like, how are you differentiating? What's the different element to the soup that will make people crave that soup rather than any soup? Because they all more or less are the same thing, right? So it's hard getting an audience and getting it to stay. Like, I've had videos that because I hate a certain thing, they perform like they blow up. And then I have others that literally have 20 views, which is fine because I'm doing this for fun, right? But I'm like, it's hard. Even if people love the other episode, more than likely they have other issues. So they're not waiting for me to drop a new video. They're like worrying about buying, how expensive bread got or whatever, or like playing a video game. They don't want to see my dumb face. So again, like, but it's fine. You make peace with it. You move on, and like, whatever. You gotta do this for fun because otherwise it's a torture. So you gotta be passionate about YouTube.
Yeah.
So anyway, one thing when we go to over-reliance is, as creators start, and I think it's pretty clear that YouTube 10 years ago, it was easier to be something. Obviously, it has difficulty. I'm not But in a way, you had a better shot. Now it's so oversaturated. Kids are literally all they care about is like being YouTubers. Like my niece speaks as if she was a YouTuber, literally. Like subscribe and all that. But, you know, folks, as they start learning, they'll get these AI tools. I use one, you know, that will help you optimize, understand your analytics, optimize your titles. The one thing we all believe is, okay, it gives me a title score, right? It says this title, it's a 95, and then you see at the title is like, how AI will revolutionize content creation. So obviously, I don't know how they're measuring. It seems to me like an informed guess. But how many times do you see a title that says revolutionize or supercharge, you know, so you know those. But what can we tell, like, new creators or creators that have been doing this for a while about this AI over-reliance?
Whatever that is, like, spend some time and sit down with yourself and say, this is what I'm bringing to the table. This is the core of what I'm doing. And then center everything you do, every decision you make, every title you write, should try and coalesce around that core idea, because you're trying to tell YouTube what it is so exactly so that it can find the people out there that would exactly want that thing. And it can be super, you know, super niche. It can be super general, you know, but you want to try and be as clear about that as possible. And you want all your decisions to funnel into that core value. And you'll hear me, if anyone works with me as on like a client basis, they'll hear me say core value proposition over and over again. And I'm sure a lot of people get very, very tired of hearing me say those words. But we find time and time again that if you can make that consistent, you know, that's where to go. And that's what gets a channel repeat viewership. And repeat viewership is what gets audiences to grow. So everything centers around that. In terms of then and where it matters, whether it's in analytics, whether it's on the creative side, is can I use this? The question I would say is there a drudgery step? Is there a step that's highly repetitive that is important to that core value proposition or could be important to that core value proposition I could not do? And that's usually where I'd start looking for it. And drudgery doesn't mean it's unfulfilling to somebody, but like, so something like translation.
Okay.
If I were to do translation individually, it would take me a long time, you know, and I would be, as not a linguist, I have no ability here, you know, so it would take me a long time, you know, and it would be like a highly repetitive go through everything. Or subtitling. Mm-hmm. Subtitling is for a lot of creators is a thing that would not, there is no, you know, how else would I do it? It's like, I'm doing this for fun. I'm small time. I either get to subtitles or I don't. Now, YouTube's auto subtitles have gotten very, very good in the past couple of years. And then you talk about translation. So it becomes a thing of like those kind of tasks where it's like, this would take a long time and it's not something that I could do. It's not something I could perform. Those are the places where I would start to look and ask. And then on the analytics side, same kind of thing, is you don't want to leave it entirely to service to say like, this is a good title. You want to think about it from a creative perspective. But then when you're looking at the performance, you know, the ability of machine learning to, over time, give us more potential points of correlation, you know, or say like, hey, what about this? Becomes a huge thing. And if you'll excuse a tangent, that's something that actually I think about a lot when we're talking about a client basis. With most clients that we start with a relationship on them, we take their top XYZ videos, however many it is, depends kind of on who the client is, how long they've been at it. You know, sometimes it's as small as a set of 100 videos, sometimes as large as 500. And we just go through and start manually entering in things that are true about the video. You know, from a format perspective, it's a listicle type video. There's two people in the thumbnail. The average face covers about 33% of the thumbnail. It has 2 lines of text. It has 4 lines of text. Things that, like, you know, YouTube doesn't keep track of and can't. But it can conceivably build us out like, hey, your thumbnails are too wordy. You know, people don't come to thumbnails to read, you know, kind of thing. Or you do listicles and you do challenge videos. The challenge videos tend to do better by an order of magnitude XYZ. I have to severely limit the kinds of things we test against the most likely outcomes because it's so labor intensive. If I could have a machine, and it's one of those things like, I would never ask any human being to do more than we already do because it's so labor intensive. You know, and our core value proposition is looking into your data and seeing like what YouTube can't see. There's a certain drudgery step then of if I could ask something to try and find more correlations and go in more things, even if I throw out 90% of it, and I would sort of expect to throw out 90% of it,
Yeah.
that's somewhere where it's like it centers on our core value. It's a thing that we can't do and would not do with a human being. And those are the kinds of things that I would say, like, when you're looking for an AI tool, don't start looking for an AI tool. Start and do it all yourself. Figure out what it is that requires repetition, and then see if there's a way to alleviate those specific steps. And the more specific those steps, the more likely it is that a machine can figure out whether it's succeeding or failing at it. And so you'll feel more confident about the results that it's providing.
And I love this takeaway because you could kind of like transpose it to what's going on right now with many tools. And this is a conversation I had. Jeremy Tolman, he's a CEO for the app called Augie that basically, makes video easier for folks that are more beginners, small business, etc. Right? And he tells me when we were discussing the AI bubble, it's like, well, yeah, companies that are like, we're just AI because AI. And we'll see a lot of platforms that are super gimmicky. But when you think about it, it's like, how do you build a business just like adding more contracts to a video? That's not going to last. So it kind of like transpolates to that. If you're doing AI for AI's sake, might be a quick win, but might get short-lived. But like longevity will come, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing that you're saying is like coming from knowing your story so people can understand. Don't have like she said, I need to remind myself all the time. It's like help folks make the connection. Don't be lazy. Don't make them do the job because they won't.
Yeah, that's I think you hit the nail on the head. Is if you're going to automate a part of the process, understand that part of the process before you choose to automate it. Is kind of the big takeaway for me. If I could have anything, is and then part of that is like you have to know it. You have to at least know it a little bit to know what you're giving up, in terms of control and flexibility. Or in the case of like, I would expect if I was using machine learning tool to draw correlations, that some of them, like, I'm going to have to spot check at least. But by knowing what it takes to go through and determine those things and where human error enters it, like, I would feel a lot more comfortable automating that part of the process than something like a thumbnail or something so creative.
I have actually an extension that automates. I mean, I use my own thumbnails, right? But it gives you, if you're looking for ideas, I'm pretty sure already when, it'll do a cover for you. And it feels like it's always the same cover, with a kind of like Android looking thing. And it's like how AI will revolutionize listicles. But Tim, is there any tool that you're excited about currently that leverages generative AI in any way?
So in terms of a specific tool, no, but everything I hear about translation excites me very much.
It seems localization is a big thing for you.
Yes, because one, it's one of those things that it hits like all the right notes for me in that, one, some languages are difficult to get a translation for. And by generating it, if we can get it with some level of accuracy, it gets to a thing where it's like, and when we talk about like ethics and stuff, is that taking away a job? It can. And like, that's something that we have to really confront. But if we're talking about a language that's not spoken by many people, we can provide accessibility. And so it excites me from an accessibility standpoint. I can talk to more people more reliably. And also just not even in a video sense. It's exciting in that, and I know a little bit of Spanish. If I ever have to talk to somebody in Spanish, that if I absolutely need to get a point across, that I can probably get a somewhat reliable translation is very exciting. It's relatively binary in terms of success and failure, so I'm excited about its ability to improve because you're not going to come up against that weird human creative spirit. Like, I know there is a difference between like localizing text and translating text, but the ability to just reach comprehension is exciting for me. And then, just from a viewership standpoint, it makes our videos more accessible from a viewership perspective. So it kind of succeeds on multiple levels in a way that very much intrigues me. There's plenty of work from a generative images. There's not enough I do in my day-to-day that I'm excited about. And it's not entirely new, but image recognition is always interesting to me, just because that becomes a huge point in terms of like correlations. The ability to process, asking people to process. And it sounds easy to be like, how much of, if I have a channel that has a bunch of faces on it, and I ask somebody, how big are the faces on there? And they'll go like, well, usually most people will start to realize that you need to pick thresholds, approximately 25%, approximately 50%, 67%, whatever the numbers are. but people are very bad in the moment at measuring out what 50% of a thumbnail being face is. So even if the computer is prone to error there, so is a human. And so it's one of those things like I think you could get within a margin of error that's human. And then the more data points I have, I'm always excited to jump into it. I suspect that most things that people would learn from that are going to be like you said, they're going to return a statistical conclusion that's like, like you said, how AI will revolutionize, and they probably want you to capitalize revolutionize. And you'll get one face and it'll be eye contact, open mouth, pretty straightforward. But even if I have to throw out 99.99% of that, it's just data that I would not be able to meaningfully ask for without a computer's assistance.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I don't know if funny is the word, but one thing that I noticed, as I started this podcast and talking to folks like you that have been doing this for a while, I have witnessed enough fads and bubbles and changes to kind of, have a, how do you say, like a bigger picture, and maybe not, we're all susceptible to get, fall into the FOMO, etc. But kind of like as you do something in any profession, you start spotting patterns, and it's all right. But it seems the conversation, as the more I talk to AI in this space, the more it feels like we're all talking about humanity and human creativity, and AI is sort of like a stage prep, right? So one of the things that, at least for me, I'm not worried about the robots killing us, because I'm like, the electric grid will probably crap before that happens. So that's good. There's no investment in infrastructure, so we're safe. But the one thing I'm afraid of is the chatbots, right? Because those, and you already see it on, Facebook. I say Facebook and I don't even have to say anymore, but like chatbots, people will overlay on them. There's a lot of lonely people. I noticed when I had my YouTube channel 10 years ago, tons of our audience were like old people. I had a clean channel, by the way, right? And did very well, got an audience. A lot of people were like senior people that saw us kind of like as a grandchild, they kind of like cheeky grandchild. So obviously we work with that, but it's like there's so much involved. So I can see AI, whether it's deep fakes or, sort of chatbots that will influence people to take certain actions, that will happen too. So I'm afraid of us humans, actually, how we use AI. But like from an ethics perspective or safety, and I'm not talking about brand safety, I'm talking about like viewer safety, the kids that are, that YouTube is like an extension of them. How do you see that changing in this year? I don't even want to talk about 2025.
So I think you hit the nail on the head, which is one, whether or not obviously YouTube will ask people to disclose, but the ability to create a convincing fake is going to be a problem. Because even if you look closely and can tell, one, like you said, and YouTube has a heavier hand on the kids space by necessity, and they're probably taking a fairly heavy labor-intensive hand at it right now, but it doesn't take that many instances of something slipping through the crack before you could have like a real crisis on your hands. So the ability, like you said, to speak to vulnerable people, I think represents a huge, huge issue. And the ability to do so quickly. So if I'm talking about return on investment, reading Reddit channels or summarizing a movie with clips of it, I'm not worried from the standpoint of its ability to beat out a channel creatively, because people don't respond to it enough to really totally edge people out of the space. But if I want to cause harm, I don't need to reach that many people to have successfully caused harm to, 1 or 10 or 100 kids, or to run and perpetuate a scam on 1 or 10 or 100 elderly people. And I think you're going to find that becomes like a thing. And I think you talk about it like sort of in something that I've thought about before is, a synthesized voice. You can usually tell pretty good, but then you start talking about a phone and people are used to robocalls anyway. And then you get into like a tech support scam. Are you going to get to a point where you're calling people as a robocall to, scam them into buying gift cards, et cetera, and doing that whole thing and running into there. So I think you'll find that there's, I hope I'm wrong, but what worries me is the ability of, even if it doesn't succeed broadly, the ability to launch the ability to launch several small attacks just erodes it erodes your ability to be confident in what you're seeing, and it exhausts because now I want to check everything against the truth. When you see an image on LinkedIn and you think it's you start there's that also a niggling doubt of you're like, I don't want to really bash on this before I know it's not art. So you start to look at it, and that's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you do it and the more you feel you have to do it, and the tireder you get and the easier it is just to like turn off and try and not investigate. That really scares me, you know, and it's never, like you said, it's never that the robots are going to take over and kill us all. It's the mundane. It's the mundane run of the mill. In a year's time, you're going to be seeing like scam hunter channels talking about like, hey, they're using ChatGPT to filter out people quicker before giving them over to a real scammer kind of thing. It's not exciting. It won't hit the news in the same way. But that's where I think you'll see a lot of problems.
And again, we're almost wrapping, by the way, but it gets so interesting talking to you, right? Because like you have such a interesting view of what you do. Obviously, as someone that does this, but also like has to get into like culture, media changes, right? I'm assuming you're familiar, right, with shrimp cheeses, or not? If not, I'm happy to share. What
I'm a little bit like I've heard the name, but I couldn't tell you things about it.
Okay, I'll share because also I don't want to assume people know. But basically, this is a image that has Jesus made of shrimp. So we're talking about something that both you and I would say people will more than likely understand. This is AI generated. Well, it wasn't like that. Many, people were getting like emotional, it's preying on their faith, but also the end goal to this is basically, you would have people say like, if you believe in whatever that, babies need to be happy, reply amen. So you have like 100 people replying amen, 100 people that then reach out through the Facebook inbox, because you cannot cast it in it, and you got people that you already kind of like you said, you pre-filtering, gullible enough. So, you get 2% of those. But if you're doing, 100 million AI images, that all adds up. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's it's one of those things that interacting and having we talk about the internet, and its value to let us communicate, and no matter how much people wish it would be different, like AI will make communicating on the internet harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I recommend everyone, if you haven't read the Death Internet Theory, go and Google for that, because it's a really interesting thing. And I think, it's a scenario that it's much more possible, right, than the robot apocalypse. So, Tim, we've gone really dark. Now let's bring some light in here. The passion is like you speak and it just lights up, dude. Like you got me all excited about talking about analytics, so that already it's a huge achievement. But like, what's making you excited enough in this current scenario to continue showing up every day in this industry that we're blessed with making it every day?
A couple of things. One is that every day, basically, you can still find something new. You can still find something new that people are trying to do. It doesn't always appeal to me, but I like, and I'm very proud of my ability to have like just a backlog of like weird videos that I can purvey to other people. And so I hold on to that, is that, it hasn't making these tools, like there's ethical concerns, there's economic concerns, but they don't stomp out human creativity by existing. And people continue to be creative, and perhaps we're finding there's action. And I'm hopeful that it's placed a cultural premium on it of people doing a thing. So I see videos. The one I recently found that was making me laugh was somebody was going through different towns and different video games and calculating the unemployment rate of just fictional cities. And you get stuff like that where it's like, it's just funny, weird stuff. And our ability, for all the noise and all the frustrations and doing that, it's probably they have a Patreon. I think they're actually doing pretty well. That's a breakout success, and those are rare, but it's exciting to me that we live in a world where that can exist. In the world pre the internet, where things are gated by television and the airwaves, that can't exist because there's not enough appeal. But we find when we have 7 or 8 billion people that enough people need to know what the unemployment rate in Super Mario Sunshine is right now, that video has been made and exists and you can watch. Right. That just fills every day with a little bit of joy.
Mm-hmm. Until a minute ago, I didn't care, but now I'm desperate. I'm like, just say, okay, like, we need the link. Tim, if you can share with us, I want to add it to the show notes.
I can share you a link.
Yeah.
I can get you a whole bunch of weird things and niche interests.
Please do. I mean, I pick different verticals to get obsessed with, and lately, not as much anymore, but I've been very interested in the vertical of British and American influencers that moved to China to create videos promoting different things about China, how they're so much better. And it's the gift that keeps on giving. But also it's made me reflect a lot on what happens on this side of the world and how maybe we're not that different. But, happy to trade videos with you, man. I'm like, I love finding weird shit. Sorry, can't curse. But like, I love finding this stuff. So, Tim, where can, let's say, entrepreneurs, companies, content creators that want to grow their channel get all this knowledge that you have to leverage? Like, how do folks get in touch with you, find out more about your work that you're doing?
So you can find us at, I believe it's just littlemonstermediaco.com, and you can find us there. You can always reach out there. I'm also happy to give out Tim at littlemonstermediaco.com. You can get in touch with me directly. I'm always happy to answer questions. I'm always happy to talk about things. If you want me to go through your entire analytics, I'm going to have to charge for that. But I'm always happy to answer questions.
Man, you're doing the Lord's work. Like, the minute I get a sponsor, I might get in touch with you and with a thumbnail creator. Those are the two things that I'm like, cannot wait to.
Yeah, thumbnail creator is huge. And that's why I always raise my hackles. Like, it's so tough to get right. And I've had to make thumbnails before. I'm so glad we have graphic designers, because it's so tough.
I think it takes me the same amount of time to create the thumbnail to any video I publish. Everything else is title and thumbnail stress me out in a way that I don't think it's ever going to be a way. I've been doing this for 10 years and I still get stressed, or like not stressed, but anxious.
Yeah, I think about that just as a fun factoid to leave you off with. At VidCon, somebody on the Mr. Beast team talked about that they will often begin with the thumbnail and what the thumbnail will look like, and then build the video around that idea to give a sense of like its importance and gravity.
Yep. So, well, Tim, I just want to say how thankful I am. I feel like I already had high expectations from this conversation, just because also this is the one topic that is close to my heart, right? I can talk about marketing and everything else, but I'm a YouTube person through and through. I owe my career to YouTube, and being in LA, I owe it to YouTube as well. So, dude, it's been amazing. I enjoyed this so much, and I do hope people, start investigating the stuff you have created, the videos you folks have done for Little Monster. I know when it was getting started. And again, I'll stress enough, hate analytics. You guys were super helpful on the content you were creating. I think even before you met, I remember, because it also was funny seeing the evolution on camera, how you go from being awkward to being, with all the bells and whistles. So also I enjoy a lot as someone that really likes, like, I consume the format, but also I like spotting those like outlines and the structures and what can I learn, what works for that channel that might work for me. So yeah, it's a joy, and it's probably I enjoy every conversation, but again, this one close to my heart. So dude, thank you so much for bringing all your knowledge and your willingness to spend this time with us.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
All right. And for all of you that are watching, once again, thank you so much for watching this video interview. It's also available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and everywhere that you can hear audio podcast. Thank you for coming. I wish to see you again. If you want, subscribe. If you don't. But hopefully see you next week.
Amo la creación en mi pantalla, bits y bytes en danza, todo brilla, cada código que escribo canta. Sabor a cumbia.